Hello, I'm going to tell you about a book I read entitled Ruth Hall by Sara Willis. She is also known as Fanny Fern. That is her pen name during this discussion. Let me tell you a little bit about Sarah's early life. Sara was married to Charles Eldridge in 1837, and they had three beautiful daughters. Her eldest daughter died from meningitis, and soon after, her husband died from typhoid fever. Without any income of her own, because Sara, worked in the household, she sought help from her family and her in-laws, and they all told her that she needed to remarry in terms of providing for her and her daughters. So in 1849, she remarried Samuel Farrington. This marriage didn't last as long. She ended up finding out that he was very jealous of her, and she decided to leave him, which was a big no-no at the time. So without having any type of income, she went back to her family and in-laws again, and nobody wanted to help her. They pretty much turned their back on her. She ended up having to give one of her daughters to her in-laws to raise in order for her to provide what little bit she could for her and her remaining daughter. She tried to work as a seamstress and a teacher, but it really didn't provide as much money as she needed. So one day she decided that she would try to, because she used to write essays when she was younger, she tried to appeal to her brother, who was a journalist at this time, and send in some work for him to read. Well, he ended up sending it back saying there was no place for her to write, and all of it was basically garbage. Well, that didn't make her give up. She ended up sending out sketches to several newspapers, and a Boston newspaper picked it up and ended up publishing several of her sketches. This allowed her to be able to provide for her and her daughter that was still living with her at the time. Soon after, she wrote the story Ruth Hall, which is basically an autobiography of herself, but at the time people didn't realize that it was her story and her struggles throughout life. She, after writing the best-selling book of Ruth Hall, she found that she could pick up a job as a weekly columnist with the New York Ledger, in which she was making like $100 a week. At that time, due to the fame of Ruth Hall and her now having a weekly paycheck, she was able to get her other daughter back, and she moved away, and she was able to support the family nicely from then on out. But today we're going to focus on Ruth Hall's popularity. Pretty much during that time, women weren't supposed to be in the workplace. They were thought to be doing the domestic duties of the household. In Jennifer Harris's Marketplace Transactions and Sentimental Currencies in Fanny Fern's Ruth Hall, Miss Harris goes on to talk about these two worlds that were separate, a man's world versus a woman's world. A man was the patriarch of the family and was to go out into the workplace and provide for his family, while the woman was supposed to do the domestic duties and be submissive to her husband and stay in the household and raise the children. So pretty much the story of Ruth Hall and the story of Sara Willis coincided with each other in these thoughts for the most part. Also, it should be said that in Carol Moses' The Domestic Transcendentalism of Fanny Fern, it was thought that Sara Willis, also known as Fanny Fern, was more of a transcendentalist writer. Usually in transcendentalist writing, several different themes emerge, and one of the ones that I felt stood out was that she rejected society's norms, in that she pushed through and done what she had to feed her family. She didn't just stay in the household and stay in a bad marriage. She sought a way out of that and found a way out, and actually was very successful as a writer after that. She gained a lot of notoriety for it, not just for Ruth Hall, but many other things that were published. At that time, during society, there wasn't a lot of things going on for women because they were in the household. A lot of people looked down on her as a writer, especially once they realized the story of Ruth Hall was actually her very own story. But a lot of people found it very interesting and found it, to be an uplifting story to help women. At that time, Nathaniel Hawthorne, he viewed women as just how most men would, that they did not belong in the workplace, they belonged at home. But soon after he read Ruth Hall, he changed his mind and he publicly apologized for his statements. And in James Wallace's Hawthorne and the Scribbling Women Reconsidered, he quotes what Nathaniel had said, as far as Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote, or he quoted, "The woman writes as if the devil is in her, and that is the only condition in that a woman writes anything worth reading." I think that statement says a lot about society and how it's changed, and I really do feel like that Fanny Fern helped to reshape society, just to break out of the everyday, and women didn't have to be in the household, but they can go out into the workplace and make a name for themselves, and actually Sara Willis, aka Fanny Fern, did. In conclusion, I just feel like it was a great read. If you have time to read it, pick it up, read it. You'll enjoy the story, and just see how it kind of reshaped America and reshaped how people viewed women back then and how they do now. Thanks for taking the time to view my video, and I hope you enjoyed it.